In 476 AD, the Roman Empire fell, the greatest civilization in the history of the Western world. The empire that had dominated 3 continents for 500 years, that had built roads still used today, laws still followed today, architectural techniques still employed today, collapsed. Not because a more powerful enemy defeated it in battle, not because of plague or famine. It collapsed because of what was happening inside it. Corruption at the top, distraction at the bottom, a ruling class that had forgotten what it meant to serve, and a population that had forgotten what it meant to resist. Now, I want you to hold that image in your mind, and I want you to listen to this description of a civilization and tell me who I am describing. A nation founded on stolen land, whose original inhabitants were systematically exterminated. A nation built by the labor of people who were enslaved and then told they were free. A nation whose founding documents spoke of liberty and equality, written by men who owned other human beings. A nation that became the most powerful military and economic force in the history of the world. A nation whose wealth is controlled by a handful of banking dynasties, whose names most people never learned in school. A nation whose population is kept distracted by entertainment, sport, and manufactured outrage, while the real decisions are made in rooms they are never invited into. A nation whose media is owned by 6 corporations. A nation whose politicians are purchased by lobbyists before they ever cast a single vote. Rome or America? The answer is both. This is the Rome Code, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let us start at the beginning, because the founding story of Rome, the story they tell in schools, is a myth. Not mythology in the sense of gods and heroes, though Rome had those too. A myth in the sense of a carefully constructed narrative designed to give an act of violence the appearance of destiny. Rome was not founded by noble men with a vision of civilization. It was founded by a tribe of shepherds and outcasts on a hill above the Tiber River, who made themselves powerful through a simple and brutal strategy. They absorbed neighboring tribes, sometimes through alliance, more often through conquest. They took their land, they took their culture, they took their gods and renamed them. The Etruscans, who had a sophisticated civilization in central Italy long before Rome existed, with their own writing system, their own art, their own political institutions, were absorbed into Rome so completely that today most people have never heard of them. Their civilization was erased. Their land became Roman land. Their people became Romans. This is the original Roman playbook. Conquest followed by cultural erasure, followed by rebranding. The conquered people did not disappear. They were simply told that they were now Roman, that their old identity was inferior, that being Roman was a gift. Sound familiar? In 1492, Christopher Columbus arrived in the Americas. He did not discover it. Approximately 60 million people already lived there, one of the most diverse collections of civilizations on Earth. The Cherokee, the Aztec, the Iroquois, the Sioux, the Maya. Hundreds of distinct nations with their own languages, their own governments, their own philosophies, their own histories, stretching back thousands of years. By 1900, the indigenous population of North America had been reduced from approximately 60 million to less than 250,000. Not by accident, not by disease alone, though disease was used as a weapon deliberately, by systematic military campaigns, by forced removal, by the deliberate destruction of food sources, the slaughter of 60 million buffalo in 50 years, specifically to starve the Plains nations into submission, by boarding schools designed to kill the Indian and save the man, the direct quote of the man who designed the system, where children were taken from their families, forbidden to speak their languages, and beaten for practicing their culture. Rome erased the Etruscans. America erased the indigenous nations. Different centuries, different weapons, same playbook. Step 1, take the land. Step 2, erase the people who were on it. Step 3, write a founding myth that makes the whole thing sound like destiny.
Every empire needs a founding myth, a story so powerful, so morally compelling, that it justifies everything that came before it and everything that will come after it. Rome had two. The first was Romulus and Remus, twin brothers raised by a wolf who founded the Eternal City. Pure mythology, everyone knew it was mythology, but it served its purpose. It said Rome was chosen, destined, special. The second myth was more sophisticated and more dangerous. Rome told itself that it was not conquering the world, it was civilizing it. That the peoples it subjugated were primitive, disorganized, incapable of governing themselves. That Roman rule, Roman law, Roman infrastructure, Roman order was a gift to the barbarians. The Romans called it the burden of empire, the responsibility of the civilized to govern the uncivilized. Sound familiar? America's founding myth is the most powerful ever constructed, the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. These words, written by Thomas Jefferson, a man who owned over 600 human beings during his lifetime, a man who fathered children with an enslaved woman named Sally Hemings, who had no legal right to refuse him. The founding documents of American democracy were written by slaveholders for slaveholders on land taken from people who were being systematically exterminated. And yet, the myth was so powerful that it transcended its own contradictions. People believed it. People died for it. People are still dying for it. The idea of America, freedom, equality, opportunity, became real enough to inspire genuine sacrifice, genuine heroism, genuine progress. Even though the reality beneath the myth was built on stolen land and enslaved labor. This is what makes founding myths so extraordinary and so dangerous. They do not have to be true to be powerful. They only have to be believed. Rome believed it was eternal. America believes it is exceptional. Both beliefs serve the same purpose. They make the population feel that what their nation does is different from what other nations do, that the rules that apply to empires do not apply to them. Here is where we leave the textbook and enter the territory that the powerful have always preferred to keep quiet. Because the history of both Rome and America is not just the history of nations and governments, it is the history of money and the families that controlled it. In Rome, the real power behind the Senate was not the senators. It was the equities, the commercial class, the bankers, the traders, the financiers who funded the military campaigns, bankrolled the political careers, and collected the debts of a civilization that was perpetually at war. Men like Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Roman history, who famously said that no man could consider himself rich unless he could fund an entire army. Crassus did not just fund armies. He owned politicians, he owned judges, he owned Rome. 2,000 years later, different names, same system. The Rothschild family, founded by Meyer Amschel Rothschild in Frankfurt in the 1760s. By the early 19th century, the Rothschild banking network had branches in London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, and Naples, the 5 great power centers of Europe. They financed the Napoleonic Wars on both sides. They financed the British Empire. Nathan Rothschild reportedly said, "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the money supply." Whether he said those exact words is disputed. What is not disputed is that the Rothschild banking empire had more financial power than most European governments by 1820. The Rockefellers. John D. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil in 1870. By 1880, it controlled 90% of all oil refining in the United States. It was eventually broken up by the government as an illegal monopoly, but the breakup simply created multiple large oil companies, all with Rockefeller interests that collectively maintained the same dominance. The Rockefeller family went on to shape American medicine, funding the shift from natural and holistic treatments to pharmaceutical-based medicine through the Flexner Report of 1910, which they commissioned and funded. They shaped American education through the General Education Board, specifically designing a curriculum that produced compliant workers rather than critical thinkers. John D. Rockefeller said, "I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers." J.P. Morgan. We have met him already in the story of Tesla, but his influence went far beyond destroying one inventor's dream. Morgan effectively controlled the American financial system at the turn of the 20th century. During the financial panic of 1907, he personally organized the bailout of the US banking system, acting as a one-man central bank. This episode was used to argue for the creation of a permanent central bank. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was created, a privately owned central bank given the power to control the money supply of the United States government, a power it has held ever since. The Federal Reserve is not a government institution. It is a private bank, owned by private shareholders, whose identities are not fully disclosed, given the power to create and destroy the money that runs the most powerful nation on earth. Crassus controlled Rome through money. The banking dynasties control America through money. The names change. The mechanism does not. The Roman poet Juvenal wrote it in the 1st century AD. He was describing what the Roman ruling class had discovered was the most effective tool of population control ever devised. 2 things: bread and circuses. Feed the people, distract the people, and they will never ask who is really running things. The Roman government provided free grain, the grain dole, to hundreds of thousands of Roman citizens, not because they cared about the poor, because a hungry population asks dangerous questions. A fed population watches gladiators. By the height of the empire, approximately 1/3 of Rome's population received free grain from the state. The cost was enormous. It was paid for by the provinces Rome had conquered and looted, and it worked. The Roman mob, the hundreds of thousands of poor citizens crammed into the insulae, the apartment blocks of Rome, were kept just comfortable enough to be manageable. And the circuses. The Colosseum held 80,000 people. The Circus Maximus held 250,000, a 250,000 people watching chariot races in a single venue. Games were held on approximately 130 days per year in the late empire. Not entertainment as we understand it, state-sponsored spectacle specifically designed to channel the energy and aggression of the population into something harmless. Let them cheer. Let them rage about chariot teams and gladiatorial matchups. Let them feel passion and tribal loyalty about something that has no political consequence whatsoever. While the Senate debates who gets the tax contracts, while the generals decide which provinces to loot next, while the banking class collects its interest. Now, America, 2024. The United States spends more on food stamps, subsidized housing, and welfare programs than any nation in history, not because its government is generous, but because a population that cannot meet its basic needs becomes politically dangerous. Keep them fed, keep them housed, just enough. Not enough to thrive, enough to be manageable. The NFL generates $20 billion per year. The NBA, the MLB, March Madness. The Super Bowl, watched by over 100 million Americans, is the single most watched television event in the world. Americans spend more time watching sport than any other population on Earth. They know their team's statistics with encyclopedic precision. They can tell you every player's contract details, every trade rumor, every injury update. They cannot tell you who owns the Federal Reserve. They cannot tell you how many countries their military is currently operating in. They cannot tell you who AIPAC gave money to last year. Bread and circuses. Juvenal wrote it 2,000 years ago. The Roman ruling class perfected it. The American ruling class has simply upgraded it. The Colosseum had 80,000 seats. The NFL has 30 stadiums. Same architecture, same purpose, different uniforms. In Rome, the state controlled the narrative through a combination of official historians, public monuments, and the simple fact that literacy was restricted to the elite. The version of events that survived, that was written down, copied, preserved, was the version the powerful wanted to survive. The voices of the poor, the conquered, the enslaved, are almost entirely absent from the Roman historical record because they could not write, and because nobody with power thought their perspective worth recording. The emperors commissioned histories. They built monuments to their victories. They destroyed statues of predecessors who fell from favor, a practice called damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory. They literally erased people from the official record, chiseled their faces from stone, removed their names from inscriptions, rewrote the official version of events as if those people had never existed. America has 6 corporations that control approximately 90% of all media consumed in the United States. 6. Comcast, Disney, Warner Brothers Discovery, Paramount, Sony, News Corporation, 6 boardrooms, 6 sets of corporate interests, 6 sets of relationships with advertisers, with government, with the banking sector, 6 filters through which 330 million Americans receive their understanding of reality. Rupert Murdoch built News Corp, Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, into a media empire that shaped American political reality for decades. Roger Ailes, who ran Fox News, said explicitly that his model was to create a channel that told a specific audience what they wanted to hear, reinforced their existing beliefs, and kept them angry enough to stay watching. Not journalism, manufacturing of consent. The term was coined by Noam Chomsky, who spent his entire career documenting exactly how American media serves the interests of the powerful rather than informing the public. The Roman emperors chiseled faces from stone. The modern media machine does not need chisels. It simply does not cover certain stories, does not platform certain voices, does not ask certain questions. The erasure is quieter. The effect is identical. The Roman Senate. 200 years of Roman history books describe it as the seat of republican virtue, the greatest deliberative body in the ancient world. Men of honor debating the fate of civilization. This is the myth. The reality was somewhat different. By the late Republic, the Roman Senate was a marketplace. Political careers were bought and sold. Governors were appointed based on which province they could most profitably loot. Laws were written by the men who would benefit from them. Cicero, himself a senator, wrote in his private letters about the corruption he witnessed daily. about laws purchased, about verdicts bought, about the complete divorce between the official function of the Senate and what it actually did. He was eventually killed for saying too much of it in public. Now, Washington, D.C., 2024, there are approximately 12,000 registered lobbyists in Washington. That is roughly 22 lobbyists for every single member of Congress. The total amount spent on lobbying in the United States in 2023 was approximately $4.1 billion. $4 billion spent by corporations, foreign governments, and special interest groups to influence the laws that govern 330 million people. AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, is one of the most powerful lobbying organizations in Washington. In the 2022 election cycle, pro-Israel lobbying groups spent approximately $27 million on congressional races. Research by the University of Chicago found that members of Congress who receive AIPAC backing vote in favor of U.S. military aid to Israel at a rate of over 95% every single year, regardless of which party controls Congress. The United States gives Israel approximately $3.8 billion in military aid annually, more than any other country on Earth. This has continued without interruption through every administration, through every Congress, regardless of what is happening on the ground. That is not foreign policy. That is the result of $27 million in an election cycle. The pharmaceutical lobby spent $373 million on lobbying in 2022. The same year, insulin, a medication that costs approximately $6 to produce, was selling for up to $300 per vial in the United States. People were rationing their insulin. People were dying because they could not afford medication that cost $6 to make. The pharmaceutical companies were posting record profits. The senators who could have capped insulin prices had taken on average $67,000 each from pharmaceutical lobbying groups. The Roman Senate sold verdicts and governorships. The American Congress sells votes and legislation. Cicero was killed for saying it out loud in Rome. In America, the information is publicly available. The lobbying disclosures are filed. The donation records are public. The voting patterns are documented. Everything is visible, and nothing changes. Because the system is not broken. The system is working exactly as it was designed to work. Rome was a military empire. Not metaphorically, literally. The entire political and economic system of Rome was built on continuous military expansion. When Rome stopped expanding, the system began to fail. Because the system required conquest. It required new provinces to loot, new populations to tax, new slaves to feed the Roman economy. The moment Rome reached its territorial limits, the moment there was nowhere new to conquer, the internal contradictions of the system became impossible to manage. The Roman military was also the single largest employer and the single largest economic engine of the empire. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, weapons manufacturers, supply chains, construction of roads, forts, ships. The Roman military-industrial complex, in modern terms, consumed an enormous proportion of the imperial budget, and the men who supplied it, who provided the grain contracts, the weapons contracts, the construction contracts, became extraordinarily wealthy and used that wealth to ensure the military kept expanding, because expansion meant more contracts. The United States military budget in 2023 was $886 billion, more than the next 10 countries combined. The United States has approximately 750 military bases in 80 countries around the world. It has been involved in military conflict continuously, without a single year of complete peace since 1941. The defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, collectively earned over $150 billion in government contracts in 2022 alone. Their chief executives sit on government advisory boards. Their former employees rotate into senior Pentagon and government positions. Their lobbyists spend hundreds of millions ensuring that the military budget never decreases. General Dwight Eisenhower, a man who had commanded the largest military operation in history, the D-Day invasion, gave a farewell address as president in 1961, in which he warned the American people about what he called the military-industrial complex. He said that the conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience, and its total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. He warned that the military-industrial complex was acquiring unwarranted influence, that it was a threat to democracy itself. That warning was delivered 60 years ago by the President of the United States and has been ignored ever since. Here is the thing about corruption. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive one day and declare, "I am corruption. I have come to destroy your republic." It arrives slowly, incrementally. Each individual compromise seems reasonable. Each individual exception seems justified. And then, one day, you look up and the republic is gone, and nobody can identify the exact moment it ended. The Roman Republic lasted approximately 500 years. It ended when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC with his army, an act that was legally defined as treason, that every senator knew was the end of Republican government, and that nobody stopped. Not because they could not stop it, but because the Republic had already been so hollowed out by decades of corruption, by the buying of offices, by the private armies of wealthy men, by the concentration of land into fewer and fewer hands, that it had become a shell. Caesar did not destroy the Roman Republic. He simply walked into the ruins and sat down. America. The Supreme Court in 2010 ruled in Citizens United versus FEC that corporations are people and that money is speech. That ruling means that there is no legal limit on how much money a corporation or a billionaire can spend to influence an election. None. Unlimited dark money can flow into American politics from any source through political action committees with minimal disclosure requirements. Since that ruling, the amount of outside money in American elections has increased by approximately 900%. 900%. The billionaire class, the top 0.1% of Americans, now accounts for more political donations than the bottom 90% of the population combined. 45 of the 59 people who have served as US Treasury Secretary have come directly from or returned directly to Wall Street. The same revolving door exists between the Pentagon and defense contractors, between the FDA and pharmaceutical companies, between the EPA and the energy industry. The regulators are drawn from the industries they regulate. The industries they regulate fund the politicians who appoint the regulators. It is a closed loop, a system of self-perpetuating power that wears the costume of democracy while functioning as something else entirely. Caesar walked into the ruins of the Roman Republic. The billionaire class is already inside the ruins of American democracy. The question is not whether the Republic has been compromised. The question is whether anyone has noticed. Let us talk about the ordinary people. Because in the grand narrative of empires, the generals, the emperors, the banking dynasties, the senators, the ordinary people are usually an afterthought. But the ordinary people are where the fall actually happens. The generals and emperors survive the fall of empires. They find new patrons, new positions, new ways to be powerful. It is the ordinary people who pay. By the 3rd century AD, the average Roman citizen was in a state of accelerating decline. Taxes had risen dramatically to fund endless military campaigns. The small farmers who had once formed the backbone of Roman society had been driven off their land, which was bought up cheaply by wealthy landowners when the farmers could not pay their debts. These landless farmers drifted into the cities, joining the swelling urban poor who survived on the grain dole and the entertainment of the games. The middle class, the backbone of any functioning society, had been squeezed out of existence. The wealth of the empire was flowing upward with increasing speed. The senatorial class and the equities accumulated land, slaves, and capital at a rate that made the gap between rich and poor wider with every generation. Sound familiar? In the United States today, the top 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. The 3 wealthiest Americans, 3 individuals. own more wealth than the bottom 50% of the American population. 165 million people. 3 men own more than all of them put together. The Roman middle class was destroyed by debt, by displacement, by taxation that fell disproportionately on those who could least afford it, while the wealthy used legal mechanisms to avoid paying their share. The American middle class has been declining since the 1970s. Real wages, adjusted for inflation, have barely moved in 50 years for working Americans, while corporate profits have increased by 300%. The Romans called it latifundia, the concentration of land in the hands of the few. America calls it shareholder value. Different vocabulary, same mathematics. We have talked about Ibn Khaldun in a previous video on this channel, but we cannot talk about Rome and America without returning to him. Because everything we have described, the corruption, the bread and circuses, the concentration of wealth, the hollowing out of civic virtue, the gap between the founding ideals and the reality, Ibn Khaldun described all of it in 1377. He called it the third stage of the civilizational cycle, the stage where the ruling class has forgotten what it built, where comfort has replaced purpose, where the institutions that were created to serve the people now serve only themselves. He said that civilizations in this stage do not collapse suddenly. They hollow out from within over decades. The external appearance of power remains, the military, the monuments, the cultural dominance, long after the internal cohesion has dissolved. Rome looked powerful to most observers right up until it did not. America looks powerful to most observers today. But Ibn Khaldun's most important insight was this: the collapse does not come from weakness. It comes from a loss of asabiya, social cohesion, the shared sense of purpose, the willingness to sacrifice for the collective, the belief that we are one people with one future. When that is gone, when the population is divided against itself along lines of race, religion, politics, class, when half the country hates the other half more than they distrust the people actually running things, the empire is already over. It just has not noticed yet. America in 2024, Democrat versus Republican, black versus white, urban versus rural. Each side convinced the other side is the enemy. Meanwhile, the banking dynasties donate to both parties. The military contractors sell to both administrations. The lobbyists own members of both houses. The division of the population is not an accident. It is the most sophisticated application of the Roman strategy of divide and rule ever attempted. Keep them fighting each other. They will never look up. Historians of Rome have identified a list of warning signs that appeared in the decades before the final collapse. Read this list carefully, because every single item on it applies to the United States today. Political paralysis. In the final century of the Western Roman Empire, the political system became completely unable to function. Emperors lasted months before being assassinated or overthrown. The Senate passed legislation that was immediately reversed. The government could not agree on basic decisions of taxation and military funding. The political class was more focused on defeating its internal rivals than on governing the empire. America has had a government shutdown, where the federal government literally stops functioning because Congress cannot pass a budget, 11 times since 1980. The political system is more paralyzed than at any point since the Civil War. Currency debasement. Rome began debasing its currency in the 3rd century AD, reducing the silver content of coins to fund military spending. By 268 AD, a silver coin contained approximately 2% silver. The result was catastrophic inflation that destroyed savings and destabilized the economy. The United States has printed more money since 2020 than in the entire previous history of the nation. The national debt stands at over $34 trillion, a number so large it is essentially meaningless to the human mind. Inflation has reduced the purchasing power of ordinary Americans dramatically. The dollar has lost approximately 97% of its value since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. overextension of military. Rome fell partly because it could no longer afford to defend its borders. The military had expanded beyond the empire's capacity to fund it. The US has been in Afghanistan for 20 years. It left having accomplished nothing and having spent $2.3 trillion. It is simultaneously maintaining military commitments in Europe, the Middle East, the Pacific, and Africa. The cost of empire is accelerating. The tax base to pay for it is shrinking. Loss of faith in institutions. By the end, Romans had stopped believing in the Republic, stopped believing in the Senate, stopped believing the myths that had sustained the empire. The social contract had broken down. Trust in government, in media, in institutions of all kinds is at historic lows in America. According to Gallup, only 8% of Americans have high confidence in Congress. 8%. In the most powerful legislative body in the world. The Romans stopped believing in Rome before Rome fell. Americans have stopped believing in America after Rome fell. What happened? This is the question that the Rome-America comparison ultimately leads to. And the answer is both more complicated and more hopeful than the simple narrative of collapse suggests. Rome did not disappear. Its language became the foundation of half the languages of Europe. Its law became the foundation of most of the world's legal systems. Its architecture was studied, copied, and built upon for 2,000 years. The Catholic Church, the institution that outlasted the Western Empire, preserved Roman knowledge through the Dark Ages and transmitted it to the Renaissance. Rome fell as a political entity. Rome never fell as a civilization, but the transition was brutal. The period between the fall of the Western Empire in 476 AD and the stabilization of medieval Europe took approximately 200 years. 200 years of plague, war, famine, population collapse, and the loss of most of the technical and organizational knowledge that had sustained the empire. The people who lived through that transition did not experience it as the birth of a new order. They experienced it as the end of the world. What comes after America is not nothing. Something will come after. The question is whether what comes next is better or worse than what exists now. Whether the knowledge, the values, the genuine achievements of American civilization, the music, the literature, the science, the ideals of liberty that were never fully realized but were always aspired to, survive the collapse of the political and economic system built on top of them. Ibn Khaldun would say, the answer depends on asabiya, on whether there is a group somewhere, on the periphery, hardened by struggle, united by genuine shared purpose, with enough cohesion to build the next thing. There always has been, in every previous cycle. The question is whether that group will build something better than what came before, or whether it will simply repeat the same mistakes with different names. Here is what I want you to take from this video. Not despair, not conspiracy for its own sake, not the pleasure of believing you have seen through the illusion while others remain blind. Those are easy responses. They are also useless ones. What I want you to take is this. The patterns are real. The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the J.P. Morgans, the banking dynasties that have shaped both the creation and the direction of American power are documented historical fact, not conspiracy theory. The lobbying system that has turned the American Congress into a marketplace is documented in public filings. The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about is visible in every defense budget. The bread and circuses that keep the population distracted are not hidden. They are the most prominent feature of American cultural life. Seeing these things clearly is not the end of something. It is the beginning. Because you cannot change what you cannot name. The Romans who saw what was happening, the philosophers, the historians, the senators who wrote in their private letters about the corruption they witnessed, were not wrong to see it. They were wrong to believe that seeing it was enough, that naming it was enough, that writing it down was enough. The fall of Rome took 500 years from the first signs of internal decay to the final collapse. America is younger than Rome was when the decay began. The future is not written. The playbook has been used before. But playbooks can be broken. Patterns can be interrupted. Empires have fallen. But the people inside them have always survived. And sometimes they built something better. The question is not whether you can see the pattern. You have seen it now. The question is what you do next. Empires of thought. This is only the beginning.